Hi, I'm Valerie Englehart, and in this video I am going to be doing a mini painting of a pair of water lilies. Now I'm doing a mini painting because it's for an art call, and these are really popular for gifting. So I am starting with some Smith Undersea Green. And what's interesting about this painting for me is even though I am painting a pond with water lilies, I'm primarily using green colors. So the three greens I'm going to be using are Smith's Undersea Green, and that's going to be the majority of the painting. For the darkest darks, I'm going to be using Winsor Newton's Perylene Green. It's one of my favorite deep dark greens. And then for anywhere where I want it to have a little bit of sparkle of light, I'm going to be using Winsor Newton's Green Gold. I will say, I really have been wanting to use Smith's Iridescent Electric Blue lately, so I do incorporate that into the piece just because it was feeling a little too green, and I like including sparkle, especially in these small paintings. It helps them feel a little extra special, and that way when you buy an original, you get all of those brush strokes and the shimmery shine versus a print. Unless I do a hand embellished print, it won't perfectly replicate that sparkle just because printers can't really distinguish that and do it. So I'm working on a pad of hot press paper, just 4 by 6 inches. And here I go now with that Iridescent Electric Blue. And I've got my block up at an angle just so that it lets the water flow. I like to use gravity to get some movement. And off to the side, I am working from a reference image. I don't have it shown here, but what I've done is I found a photograph on a site called Unsplash, and I notanized it. So I used a notanizer app to isolate values, and I isolated it into 4 values so that the painting could be blocked into just light value, lighter midtone, darker midtone, and dark. And the benefit of doing that is it lets me use whatever colors I want. I don't have to mimic whatever's in the photo, and I don't get distracted by what's in the photo. I'm just putting in blocks of value. I could say blocks of color, which is technically true, but I'm not fully following a color. I am following how thick or thin the paint is based on if that area looks white, gray, or black. The brush I am using is a size 8 Da Vinci round Cosmo top. It's a good synthetic brush. I don't use it as often as maybe I should, just because I usually work on really big pieces of paper, and this is, well, I think better designed for these smaller works. So right now, I am lifting the paint. I've rinsed my brush and I've dotted it on a paper towel, and I am doing these curved brush strokes to mimic the petals of the water lily. And what that is doing is it's lifting the paint from the paper. This is where knowing the properties of your pigments is beneficial, like knowing if it's a staining color, does it lift nicely? And these colors do lift very nicely. And part of why I want to lift it before I go in with some white ink later is it will create these natural shadows. Because even though I am scrubbing the paper, it's still got tone to it. It's not the perfect white of the paper. Whenever I was scrubbing, I touched that puddle of paint and it bled down into the flower, and I kind of like that. So I'm not panicking. I'm just going to keep going. This is the first wash. And sometimes watercolor artists, and I'll admit, me included, can get stuck if things aren't looking absolutely perfect in the beginning. But it does take, I'd say on average, about 3 passes before it's done for me. Some people it takes maybe 5 to 7, but I have a short attention span, so I typically work first wash, and then second wash slash like major details, and then finally the fine details. So I let it dry naturally so that those watercolor marks could form. And now I'm going in with a size, I think it's a size 1 script liner brush by Silver Black Velvet. And I'm trying to bring the white of the water lilies out by painting negatively around it using the darker greens, both the Undersea Green and the Perylene Green. The Undersea Green is warmer, the Perylene is cooler. And I don't want things to look like a cutout, so I'm leaving gaps, and I don't want it to all be one color and one tone, so I'll put in the block of color and then I'll lighten it and bleed it away, just because I do want this to look cohesive. And I love that watercolor is transparent, so when I put something down and I bleed it away, it doesn't create a hard line. It just blends beautifully. And another way that I like to paint is using a limited palette. So right now I'm just back to working with the greens, and I'm only working with 2 of those 3 greens on my paper. And even for the entire painting, including the white that I will end up pulling out, I'm only using, I guess I'm going to use 6 paints in this because I do bring out some gold. I really do want some bling, and I love how the centers of the lotus are going to be a yellow color. So instead of using yellow, I use an iridescent Aztec Gold paint. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but I get so excited when I get to pull out the sparklies. But right now, just negative painting around things. I don't want to outline every petal. I think that's boring. I think it makes it look like paint by numbers. And so I do leave some places a bit ambiguous, a little more faded. And now I'm going in and creating more shapes, because even though this pattern that's happened looks abstract and cool, it needs more of a punch, especially in the foreground. So I am adding in just some geometric shapes using that Perylene Green in a dark value, and I'm doing that to create more interest, more drama. I'm trying to make it pop. Mm-hmm. And so the best way to do that is to add contrast. If you can get contrasting colors, contrasting values, contrasting shapes, all of that stuff can help draw the eye. And notice on that right side of the paper how I painted those shapes, but when it's connected to the paper, it almost looks like a rounded arrow pointing back in. And I am doing that with some intention, in that I want the eye to bounce around within my painting. I don't want it to leave. And so I'm trying to frame it in a way that is organic and not super obvious. I'm not perfectly painting the lily pads. I am painting some shapes in certain spots to create depth and therefore create the idea of lily pads. I wouldn't say I'm lazy, I just think I like to paint in a way that lets the viewer use their imagination too. I'll meet you halfway. I also don't want this to become too busy, so the majority of this shape making, of increasing values, I'm going to be doing that in the lower third of the painting. So that upper third, I'm going to leave that alone. Even if in my reference photo and my notanizer, it shows that there are darker values up there. If everything's really important and contrasting, it can be harder to focus. I want it to be painted and I want it to have those textures and that shimmer, and that gives it enough. That is enough, and I can leave it alone. But as someone who loves to keep putting down paint and make brush strokes because it's so much fun, it can be hard to resist. But do try to resist doing too much. One thing I've heard from artists is that you should stop about half an hour before you think you should stop. Which I think if you're in a stage where you're still figuring things out, that is pretty good advice. I've gotten pretty good at knowing when to stop, but that's come from hundreds of paintings. Also, I don't usually paint on hot press paper, so I'm finding that the colors get a lot paler than I'm used to. So I keep having to go back in. And that's not a problem necessarily with watercolor as long as you are aware of the wetness of your paper and the properties of your paints. Some paints lift very easily, and that can be a great thing if you're trying to lift the white back of the paper, like when we made those petals. But it can be a pain in the butt if you want to go and glaze over something and then that shifts the pigment and it makes it like a mistake. And I find that happens especially with like black hematite genuine. So don't try to glaze over black hematite genuine. And I'm just adding a little bit of green gold to a little bit of sparkle of sunlight. All right, one of my favorite parts, I've grabbed my liner brush and I am putting in the centers of these flowers, but because they are sticking up through the petals, I'm trying to imagine where certain petals end, where there would be gaps. And I'm gonna have the water lily that's more to the right have more of these coming out versus on the left one, they're gonna be a little more hidden. But I love it. It adds sparkle. It's so pretty and it creates a lovely contrast in temperature. And then I'm grabbing my toothbrush and I'm dabbing the excess moisture off on a paper towel, and I'm off camera for a bit testing it on a piece of paper to make sure I get the wettest, blobbiest bits out. And then I spray my paper, but I'm doing it in a certain direction as if something were opening and pollen was exploding out. Now with the latest update on my iPhone, it did a cool thing with the camera and I'm still getting used to it, so I forgot to push a button properly. So I don't have footage of me putting on the white acrylic ink. I decided on ink over gouache. I don't know why, really. It was just, I think because I like the brush strokes it makes. And as you can tell, it did. But I only did it up on like the tips because I wanted to bring out the petals a bit more, create a little more differentiation, but I liked the tone that was there from scrubbing the paper, and that tone shines through, and so that creates even greater dimension. This is a work smarter, not harder technique. And that's another thing that I love about watercolor is it does a lot of the work for me. And I capitalize on that. And a lot of those places that I made dark in the last pass dried and became paler than I wanted, so I'm just going in again. And Perylene Green is a transparent color, so layering Perylene Green on Perylene Green isn't a problem. And one of the reasons I like to squeeze paint from tubes versus working from a pan is I can get that paint really dark and juicy. And I like having that dramatic impact. But I do need to be careful, especially on this hot press paper, because if I go in too many times, it's gonna look too messy, like I couldn't commit. A little bit of messy can be a nice style. Too much messy and you didn't know what you were doing. And then I felt like I needed more of that electric blue. So grab some more and just strategically pop it in a few places, but don't overdo it. Oftentimes, less is more. And here's the finished painting. So if you liked this video, press that like button so I know to make more like this. And if you want to see more, subscribe because I make videos every Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.